So then when you think intelligence, most people think, oh, this means smart. It means people can think logically. They may be good at math, good at language, whatever, each of which has its own. Not everybody is intelligent in all those ways, but these are all the cluster of linear forms of intelligence, which are favored in our culture, and people think of that as being the only way to be smart. But there's many different theories of multiple intelligences or multimodal intelligence. I like to say multimodal intelligence because I see these as ideally different modes of one thing, which we can develop more of that whole thing. And some people, I prefer to call it multiple intelligences. Howard Gardner was a famous theoretician of that and popularizer of that idea. So the idea that we actually do use all of these without necessarily calling them intelligence, and developing them all is ideal. Not everybody, it seems like individuals, somebody will be better at reason, somebody else will be better at emotion, somebody else will have more spatial capacities. And part of this is developing all of these in ourselves, but part of it is recognizing that we have strengths and weaknesses in them. And when we get together in groups, teams, whatever, or in the larger society, thinking of how to integrate all of these in whatever's going on, and seeing that what I'm weak in, you may be strong in, and how do we work together, even though we may have very different ways of learning and responding to things. How do we weave those together into a coherent whole? Because that will make us even more effective. I should go over these. So it's an aspect of collective intelligence as well as of individual intelligence. I should go over these a little bit. Intuition is like a holistic encounter, sort of feeling, seeing, sensing into the whole of something. And sometimes this happens in dreams. Sometimes it's a sort of gut response. Some of the most important scientific developments were intuitive, have been intuitive. David Bohm was a quantum physicist, used to feel inside himself the relationships that he would then translate into mathematical equations to describe quantum phenomena. And the famous the spiral, double spiral, double helix of DNA came to the guy who discovered it in a dream. So people often working on something linearly, and it's sort of stuck, and they're developing more and more tensions and information, and then somehow there's a flash of insight that's another phenomenon of intuition. And imagination is related to that, but it's like visions and sort of being able to put things together in our minds in images. The word image is closely related to imagination, sensing relationships and stuff through images. Emotion, we all know what that is. Emotional intelligence has to do with how well you sense, your own emotions as they unfold, and you can sense into the emotions of other people and relate to them in various ways that are useful, and control your emotions when it's inappropriate to express them, but be able to express them when it's a right time and place. So there's a whole world of dealing well with your emotions, and empathy, having empathy is a subset of emotional intelligence. So being able to bring an empathic, who's involved in this situation, and understanding their different perspectives, and allowing that empathic understanding into the deliberation, into the inquiry about how to deal with it. Some people are really good at telling stories, making sense with stories. I remember reading a psychological book with my then wife, and she read all the case studies, and I read all the theory. For me, it's like, why read the stories? The theory is what's most important. She's the only way she can make sense of it is reading the stories. The theory seems so abstract. These are two different intelligences interacting. But you can communicate a lot through stories. The dynamic stories hold the whole picture of something, often somebody's story, or just a story of how things are unfolding. Tells you lots about the dynamics of what's going on that you need to understand. And aesthetics, it's not just beauty of pictures and beauty of your space, but poverty isn't beautiful, war isn't beautiful. This sense of repugnance and attraction has power to shape how we respond to things, and it's possible to have a whole movement based on beauty. We want a beautiful world, and what's involved in creating that movement, clearly, and our bodies being able to move around, knowing where we are in relationship to things is part of it. It's at a very practical level, and our capacities to move, our awareness of our movements, awareness of other people's movements. Once you're on the ground doing something, all that is very important. A lot of what's called street smarts are based in that. And of course, the Aikido example is also people who are in martial arts and are very aware of who they are. And you can also, it's part of emotional intelligence too, noticing how people are moving and placing their bodies. The body language of people is another aspect of movement, and one's own body language. Spatial sensing, architects and designers use that a lot. What the placement of things has a gigantic impact. How things are arranged. The practice of permaculture is based on where things go in relationship to other things, and being able to think in those, being able to design something ahead of time before we have to do it in the world is it's an interesting companion to stories and imagination in terms of design capacity. Habit, being able to make things, being able to take some new behavior and incorporate it into your life. People don't necessarily think of that as intelligence, but it is. If you if you want to be able to respond appropriately to certain circumstances, having habit patterns that fit those circumstances, practicing it so that it comes smoothly to you, is a part of your being able to respond appropriately, which is a big part of what intelligence is all about. And then the intelligence of nature and transcendence. There's a whole field called biomimicry, which looks at what engineering problems have natural organisms and natural systems solved, and what can we learn from them. It's like Velcro. There's actually a natural phenomenon. It's very much like Velcro, and that was part of the discovery of Velcro, was studying, how does the fly walk up this glass wall, this glass window? It's like all sorts of things. Nature has solved many problems which we are just beginning to understand as problems, and we can look to nature and figure out what's going on and learn from nature, to say nothing of just the overall patterns of evolution and change. So like nature is the big mama of all change and adaptation and learning. It takes a long time for nature to learn. We are nature's intelligence and creativity on speed, kind of. But it's been going on for a long time. There's lots to know and model our behaviors and responses from that. And transcendence is the lifting out of whatever box you're in. There are ultimate spiritual transcendence that sees into the nature of reality and our relationship to it in very, very high levels, embodied by the mystic and meditative traditions. But there's also just the ability to get out of the box, to think differently about whatever it was you were thinking about before. It's the opposite of habit. And flexibility, the ability to step out, and interactions between diverse people helps to step out of whatever box you're in, because you have to look at it from their perspective, at least to some extent, and their challenges help you step out. So those are all different dimensions of the ability to learn, the ability to solve problems, the ability to understand what's really going on. So to the extent we can pull them all together, individually, me, myself, and collectively in our groups, because very often those different capacities make us feel like we have to fight with each other. Reason is more important than emotion. No, empathy is more important than reason. It's like, that's kind of beside the point. We need to figure out how to have our reason guided by our empathy, and our empathy guided by reason. Weave these all together. So that's what I mean by multimodal intelligence. Turtle Island Fund, and they would take applications for grant funding and meditate. They would study the applications. They gather all their data, do all their rational fact-based work, and then the what do you call them? The board of the foundation would then have a group meditation for 15 minutes or whatever, and they would each share what came up in their meditation, and then they would collectively explore what those things that came up had to do with this grant and whether they should approve it or not. And they basically based their grant approval on their intuition from the meditation, as it was informed by the facts and reason and analysis. But it was, at the end, it was the intuition. And they would then write to the people why their grant was approved or not approved. And apparently it almost always resulted in positive results for the group applying, even when the grant was rejected. I find that absolutely fascinating. The World Game that was created by Buckminster Fuller, which I've participated in, it has a lot of rationality. You learn about statistics and international dynamics, but you're on this big map of the world that covers a whole basketball court, and people are interacting on that world game. There's sort of they're doing certain things with each other, and then noticing the reactions that happen because of their different perspectives. There's a bodily, rationality, emotional, it's all sorts of engagement. And Jon Stewart, the comedian, I realized while I was thinking of examples that he is using reason and this entertainment, facts and humor and story to create deeper insight about what's going on in the news. Are you familiar with him at all?
Yes, I am.
Afar? Okay. He was once, by survey, he was once found to be the leading source of dependable news for people. People said he was their leading source of trustworthy news, which he thought was totally bizarre, because he thought of himself as an entertainer.
Right.
Anyway.
He was really brilliant, smart. Yeah.
Yes. His protege is doing pretty well too. Can't remember his name, another John. Anyway, graphic recording is another example of taking the logic of the dialogue and the relationships in the dialogue into graphic aesthetic form. Multimedia presentations, of course, are another mode of that.